Hey everybody, thanks for joining for a post Blackmagic announcement summary video. This can kind of become a bit of a tradition here on my YouTube channel to summarize the Blackmagic videos and the things that they announce after the fact. I've done quite a few of these at this point. So for those of you who did not watch the video, it was just wrapped up here a few minutes ago. Grant Petty over at Blackmagic Design announced some new products. 5 new products, I think. So 2 new switchers, 2 new cameras, and microphone bridge. So yeah, 5 new products, but 2 of them are just different versions of another product. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. There's not a lot of new content here, not a lot of new information. They're not doing anything too incredibly innovative that they haven't done before. There is one feature that they've added that actually is pretty interesting. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So I am monitoring the chat as we go. So if you happen to be joining the chat, we got some people saying hi. There's Paul. That's my friend Paul. Hello from Australia. Hello from India. Hello from New Jersey. Blah blah blah. So I am not monitoring the chat, but I would ask that we keep the comments on topic with the announcements that are happening specifically today. I don't have a ton of time before I have my next appointment, so I'm not going to be able to do a super long stream, so I'm going to need to stay fairly focused on this. But let's talk briefly about some of the things that they announced here today. So first thing that they announced was new switcher, actually 2 new switchers. So they're replacing their older television studio products with new versions. And this is a console-based switcher, so it's basically a combination of switcher as well as a control panel all in one. They have added a few new features to this that are kind of innovative that they haven't done before. There are 2 versions of this thing. There is kind of the regular one, which is just a switcher. It has streaming and a streaming capability and the ability to record the program feed. And then they have an ISO version. Let's see if they yeah, there you go. So they have to have the regular one. Excuse me, I have to stuck on a cough drop while I talk. So they have the regular one, then they have an ISO version, which can record all the different camera inputs independently on a USB-C disk, or they're also offering the option to record internally on a solid-state disk. So normally, the ability to record on disk means you have to provide your own disk. However, for a limited time, they're also including a 2 terabyte drive already installed in the unit for the ISO model. That's a limited time offer, so if it's something that interests you, you want to save $150, $200, you can order that now and get that with that disk. So we'll kind of go through sort of the laundry list of features. So every input has a scaler and frame rate converter on it. So if your switcher is set to 30 frames per second and you have a 60 frame per second source, no problem. Or you're switching in 1080 and your source is 720, no problem. It automatically does the conversion. I will mention though that if you have the opportunity to change the source to match your switcher, you're going to end up with a better result. So I would recommend not relying on that converter unless you absolutely have to. So yeah, all 8 inputs have that frame rate converter scaler on them. All the inputs are SDI. Each one of the inputs has a corresponding SDI program output. And that source is not, as far as I can tell, that source is not selectable. So it's always going to be program. It has a program out, a preview out, multi-view out. There's a multi-view on HDMI as well. There's also an aux1 and an aux2, so you have 2 aux outputs that you can route from any signal from. And that apparently does include multi-view, which is something that they have not done they did not do on the Constellation switchers. So that's a nice upgrade. Interestingly, it also has MADI audio inputs and outputs on it, and we'll get to more of that here in a little bit. It has timecode connections. It has a built-in Ethernet switch with 4 ports. I'm just going to scroll down to here to a shot of the back panel. There you go. So you got your time code. There's 4-port Ethernet switch, 8 SDI inputs, 8 SDI outputs, which are program. Your aux1 and 2, your multi-view, your preview and your program. I don't see multi-view on one of the on a dedicated SDI. It's interesting. So you would have to use one of your AUXes if you need multi-view on SDI. It has control room audio outputs, so you can talk to a studio or have monitor speakers to listen to specific mix. That allows you to isolate solo individual audio sources to listen to them. They're clearly focusing a lot more on audio with this one. So it has a studio output, so on TalkBack you can talk to people on location. RCA input for audio, XLR input for audio, and then a TalkBack jack for plugging in a headset, broadcast headset. It has reference in and out like a lot of other switchers do for gen locking. And 2 power inputs, so you've got your AC and then you've got 12 volt power, so you dual power redundant power supplies. Speaking of having some additional layers of protection, the jacks are now replaceable in this compared to some of the other things they've done in the past. So if one of your input jacks gets messed up, you can replace that, although that doesn't include the electronics. So if you fry an input, allegedly that replacing the board won't fix that. But anyway, so it is a 1080 switcher, so it does 1080p at up to 60 frames per second. Does not output interlace, does not support interlace on the output. You can accept interlace sources on the inputs, but yeah, no interlace on the output, which thankfully, yeah, I'm glad they're doing that. 2 USB-C. Let's see, has built-in audio routing capabilities, so you can change what audio is actually output to each of those SDI program outputs, which can be nice for doing mix minus, that kind of thing. Let's see. They did say that this one includes the Sting feature, which was missing from the ATEM Extreme, even though it has a button, ATEM Extreme, ATEM Mini Extreme, and then ATEM SDI Extreme. So it does include Sting feature functionality, which would imply that it also has some limited video playback capability. That includes SuperSource, so you do have this 4-input DVE SuperSource feature. So you want to do four sources on screen at one time. Let's look at the tech specs and see how many DVEs it actually features. Let's see, search for DVE. He didn't mention it during the 1 DVE. Okay, yeah, so which is interesting because the ATEM Mini Extreme model actually has 2 DVEs in it, in addition to the SuperSource. So a little bit of a downgrade there. It has a dedicated T-bar fader instead of using the audio style fader that was on the old Television Studio Pro and Pro 4K models. So yeah, these little displays here are well, it should displays what input you've actually got available on the particular button, and as you shift between bank A and bank B, you'll be able to see what those inputs are. So that's a common feature in these. Obviously, it's got the setup and control panel up top, and then something that's new on this model is the audio controls that are here, and that can also double as control for the cameras. So if you're running Blackmagic cameras, you're able to get camera control with this to control color, exposure, shutter speed, all those kinds of things. That's all available from the panel here, which is new. They haven't done that on any of their products previously. In terms of other things that are new, let's see. Built-in storage option, they've not done that before. So you can pop an M.2 SSD into the unit and record directly onto that. It also has their cloud store functionality built into it, so it can automatically sync video from internal storage or USB connected storage up to Dropbox or Google Drive, so that you can download that from somewhere else, or synchronize that to another cloud store product, which is pretty interesting. I was not able to tell from the presentation whether it starts that upload while you're still recording or whether you have to wait till the end of an event. So if you got an 8-hour event that you're recording, you probably don't want to wait till the end of the 8 hours to start that upload process. So Grant didn't indicate one way or the other whether it did that. I suspect it probably does not. It probably has to have complete files that are no longer locked and closed. So in that particular situation, you might want to periodically stop the recording and restart it so that the files are no longer still in use, and so it can actually start that synchronization process. Let's see. Audio capabilities are actually pretty strong. They really sort of Grant really sort of overemphasized the audio capabilities on this switcher. Again, you can control all sorts of the audio mixing right here on this front panel. That's not just gain and pan, but you also do EQ and compressor and gate and expander all from this panel directly. And that's what this whole section of the switcher is really focused around, is being able to do those audio mixes. So okay, this is going to be available in a couple different models. So there's the Television Studio HD8, which, by the way, I think the name, the fact that they're putting the number in the name indicates that there's probably some bigger ones coming. So yeah, so ATEM Television Studio HD8, and then the ATEM Television Studio HD8 ISO, which again adds the ability to record your 8 inputs separately on either the internal storage or a connected USB-C disc. Pricing on those, $2,995 for the regular HD8, and then $3,995 for the HD8 ISO. The ISO, in addition to having the recording capability, also has the ability to accept incoming video streams from over the internet or from over an Ethernet network. And that's where we get into the new cameras that they announced today. They have 2 new models of camera. They have the Blackmagic Studio Camera 6K Pro and a new version of the Studio Camera 4K Pro Generation 2. And the big thing that these have over the previous model is the ability to stream live over the internet. So they both have internet streaming built right in, which allows you to send the video from these cameras to these new switchers over the internet or over an Ethernet network, which makes it really easy to bring in a remote feed from somewhere else. As long as there's some IT stuff that you got to worry about. You got to worry about how to figure out how to get video into your network or from over the internet, which could be tricky if you're working on a client site. You may not have the option of reconfiguring routers to port forward and everything like that. But as long as you do, then you've got the ability to bring in footage from remotely directly from camera, and that can either be through the camera's Ethernet connection, I believe, or through USB-C tethering to a cell phone. So it allows, it's a pretty cool feature if you need remote video to come in from another location. I think this is probably Blackmagic's answer to NDI, at least to some degree, video over IP. So we know basically Blackmagic's never going to embrace NDI. It's from a competitor. NDI is actually expensive to implement. The licensing fees can be high. I know there's a lot of people out there that say it doesn't cost anything. That's not actually true. But NDI can be expensive to implement, and Blackmagic, I'm sure, has been resisting a lot of that because of the cost. Let's see. So we've got these new cameras. Look at the front and the back. Yeah, nice big screens. One thing about the 6K Pro, very interesting, and actually makes this a much more interesting product, probably the most interesting product they announced today, at least for me personally, is it uses the EF lens mount. Finally, we're getting away from Micro Four Thirds on a studio camera. EF offers a better selection of lenses when it comes to power, zoom, power focus, etc. The selection of lenses for Micro Four Thirds that offer power zoom is just frankly awful. So it's nice that we're finally getting a proper lens mount for lenses that can actually zoom electronically. The lenses that are available for EF that can do that are generally fairly expensive, but at least they're good lenses. So yeah, we finally have options for good lenses on a studio camera from Blackmagic. So in terms of cost on these, the new 6K Pro is $2,495, and the Studio Camera 4K Pro G2 is the same price it has been in the past at $1,865. So nice upgrades there for those who want to work with the Blackmagic camera ecosystem. Now, the way that video is actually transferred from the camera into the switcher seems like it's probably compatible with the streaming bridge that they've had available for a while. So for those of us who are not going to be buying this new television studio, we should be able to actually take advantage of these cameras, their remote capability as well. At least that's the promise. He didn't explicitly say that in his presentation, but he did say that the new switcher has 8 streaming bridges built in. So kind of assume that that means that the way that these cameras work is compatible with the old streaming bridge that they've had for quite a while. So, okay, with that, let me actually jump into the chat and see what questions people have here. So, grand media production. Will the 4K version be the same or not the same? That is the question. So, 4K version of the camera, I assume. Yeah, I think probably more or less the same. Other than being Micro Four Thirds and 4K instead of 6K. Let's see. Yeah, so was expecting something 4K. Yeah, I think we all were. You know, we've known for quite a while that Blackmagic is still working on 4K versions of the Constellation switchers that they announced last year at NAB, but they have not yet been announced. So at this point, we're hoping that they will announce something soon, maybe NAB in, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, or whatever that is from now. So, yes, alrighty. All switchers released should be 4K minimum spec now. That's generally going to be true, I think, but there's still definitely a market for lower end products that are less expensive where HD is just sufficient. So, the new television studio is a 1ME switcher. Did I hear correctly? Yes, you did. It is a 1ME switcher. So, yes. Kind of. Thanks, Paul, for the birthday wishes. My birthday was on Sunday this last week. So those of you who wish me happy birthday, thank you very much. All right. The dual USB-C, both for recording and a new feature. So it's essentially the same as what they've done with their Mini Extreme that I have over here and the SDI Extreme. It allows you to connect a disc to record and webcam feature at the same time, or computer control over USB-C at the same time. So that's really why that's there. Or record to 2 discs. So after one fills up, it automatically spills over to the other. So yeah, that's what the dual USB is all about. So let's see. Bummed that they didn't reduce the price of the 1ME advanced panel. Seems silly that it's still $3K for a control panel when you can get a whole new entire switcher for less. Absolutely 100% agree with you. They really should have reduced the price on the 1ME advanced panel because it has fewer buttons than the new switcher, and it doesn't have the switcher, it doesn't have the streaming, it doesn't have a lot of the other features that that are built into this new thing. It doesn't have storage, all that kind of thing, all that kind of stuff. It should be. It's actually more. So I think it's now $3,079 instead of the $2,995 that it used to be. It was one of the products that got a price bump here a little while ago. It really should be a lot less expensive than it is. They should be selling that product for $2,000 or less. It is rather unfortunate that they did not reduce the price on that. So they addressed the biggest complaint of the Studio Cam's EF mount. Absolutely agree. Yeah, the EF mount on a studio camera was the biggest announcement that they had here today. The switcher, it's kind of cool. It does some cool things, but the fact that they finally have a better mount than than the Micro Four Thirds. Compared to what the previous cameras were. Did they say how the multiple Ethernet ports work? It's just a switch. It's just an Ethernet switch. So, yeah. Limited time free NVMe was for both ISO and non-ISO. Was it? I thought it was just the higher end one. I could be wrong. Okay. All right. Who wants to bet on the 4K version of these new switchers and the Constellation will be announced? I'm hoping NAB. I was hoping it was going to be today, but obviously that wasn't in the plans. So, yeah. Okay, all right. So apparently I misread this. So no dedicated SDI preview. That's the multi-view. So it did have the multi-view, not a preview. It's really small on my screen here, so I have a hard time reading it. So there is a multi-view SDI to the left of HDMI. Okay, all right. All right, thanks for the correction. I appreciate that. We said it before. The product seems to sit in a weird spot in the market. I wonder whether they sell enough units for it to have it be successful from a margin perspective. Tough to say. It's unique. It's definitely unique in their product line. And they've had television studio products in the past. This is a bit of a unique one. So. Okay, all right. Does this new ATEM have super source? Yes, it does. It has a single super source, so you can do up to 4 sources on screen at once. So, curious if the ISO will accept any RTMP. I'm going to guess not, because the streaming bridge does not. I think they're just reusing streaming bridge technology there. So if you need to get video into it from another RTMP source, you're going to need some sort of other receiver. It's not going to work with the built-in one in the switcher. All right, yeah, I wasn't 100% sure clear, but Grant did seem to say the new cameras can output video onto the network directly via Ethernet ports as well as cell phone connected via USB. Yep. So that's kind of the impression that I got too. I got as well. So, does anyone know that these cameras can output HDMI and SDI simultaneously? Yes, they do. The models that have SDI, because the lower end version of the studio camera is HDMI only, no SDI on that one. So, and the Generation 2 can stream now too. So yeah, that streaming feature is now available on both the 6K and the 4K Pro of those studio cameras. So that's why they came out with the new Generation 2 version of the camera. So, yes. I wonder what the motivation for choice between MADI and Dante was. Probably monetary, I would guess. Dante equipment tends to command a bit of a price premium. And from what I understand, the Dante hardware is not that incredibly expensive. It's just that the products that sell, I don't know why that's being cut off. But the products that include Dante, when they sell, the manufacturers tend to bump the price. So I don't think it's necessarily inherent in Dante, but Blackmagic seems to shy away from paying licensing fees to other manufacturers. I'm sure that's just a cost thing. But Dante would incur some fees. So, but yeah, it's interesting they would go with MADI instead of Dante. I mean, Dante would be really cool because the switchers already have Ethernet in them. So it'd be really nice to just have Dante be included as part of the switcher itself. Obviously, we're not there yet. I was hoping for updates to Constellation, to HD, just some routing stuff for the most part. So I know in the other stream that Neil, you mentioned that you wanted to have the ability to route the multi-view to the Constellation outputs. Absolutely, amen for sure. So corporate does not always need 4K. That is true today. We'll see what happens in the future, but for the most part, yeah, 4K is nice to have, not a must-have. So. When do you think we'll see a Constellation 4K? My guess best at this point is going to be NAB this year. But, yeah, we'll see. Will the 6K sensor and the native EF lens support help with the low light performance? It absolutely should, in theory. Blackmagic hasn't had a problem with low light performance on their cameras for a while now. They've seemed to have taken care of that problem for the most part. So, yeah, so the 6K should be a little bit cleaner than Micro Four Thirds. The downside to going EF means you're getting a larger sensor, which means that focusing is going to can potentially be more of an issue. The larger sensor means you get a shallower depth of field, which means that as your subject that you're shooting moves around, it's going to be harder to maintain critical focus on them. You can always stop down to some degree, but then you start to get into the situation where you're having to gain up, which adds noise. So having a large sensor for live is not necessarily always a benefit. But yeah, and then this comment that it should be the same as the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro, given the neutral density. I have a feeling that it's using the same imager, the same neutral density, everything. It's just a different body, different electronics in terms of display and getting out. There's no recording, some limited recording within the camera with it to a USB-C disc. But yeah, imaging I'm sure is going to be very, very similar. So yeah. I'm kind of excited about the MADI box for external mics. Got to get a MADI switcher then, no. Okay, so I didn't actually mention that product yet, so let me find that here on their website. That's going to be probably under this. So the other product they announced, in addition to the 2 new switchers and 2 new cameras, is what they call it, the ATEM microphone converter. Let's see if it's on this page. So this gives you the little box. There it is. So this little box gives you 4 inputs, audio inputs, that are converted over to MADI. So you can do microphone level, line level, and it also has the ability to provide phantom power for a connected microphone or whatever. And it converts that to MADI, which can then go into the MADI input of your switcher. So essentially you're adding 4 new additional inputs into your switcher by adding this little box. So for those who do their audio mixing in the switcher, this can be very cool because it allows you to have allegedly higher quality audio than what you necessarily get by going through a camera. Not having the additional delay that's added by a camera. So yeah, it's an excuse me, it's an interesting way to add some additional audio channels into the audio mixer of the switcher. I assume, excuse me, do a cough drop here in a second. I assume that the switcher supports 32 channels on MADI. That's kind of that's what MADI does. So, yeah. Excuse me. The other interesting thing about this ATEM microphone converter, it has an HDMI video output, which lets you view the waveform of the audio that's coming in. So, kind of a superfluous feature, not necessarily super useful, but interesting nonetheless. So, so yeah. So, yeah, the ATEM microphone converter is just a little box. It looks like they're a smaller version of their mini converters. All right. Let's see. All the products they announced today, they said are available immediately, which are available today, which in Blackmagic wording means that you can place an order tomorrow, but it could be a while before you actually get one. So let me check the B&H Photo website, see if they have them listed yet. I'm guessing probably not. Usually takes a day for those to show up. Yep. So none of that stuff, none of the new products are listed on B&H's website yet. So we're going to be waiting at least a day before those actually become live. Let's check DVE store. They're usually pretty quick to get things listed. And they usually put them right on the front page. Yeah, so they haven't listed them yet either. It's just too new for any of the vendors to actually have listed that yet. So anyway, we'll give it some time. But in terms of what these products, the only one that actually interests me for my workflow is the new 6K Pro studio camera. And that would be in addition to my other cameras. It's certainly not a replacement. And that's mostly because of the limitations of EF lenses for live video. The cameras that I use today are the Sony PXW Z150s, and I use those because great image quality, good low light response, and wide zoom range. So the way I use them, I get a 24 times zoom range. So from the widest to the most zoomed in, it's a 24:1 zoom ratio. Getting a 24:1 zoom ratio with a constant aperture in a parfocal lens for EF lens mount or for Micro Four Thirds is basically impossible. So for anybody who's doing live work where you need a lot of flexibility of being able to zoom in and out quite a lot with an electronic zoom, so you can get nice and smooth, the servo zoom, the lenses just are ridiculously expensive. And that's one of the main reasons that I continue to use my Sony Z150s as my primary camera. It's just a lot of flexibility there, and especially for the cost. But adding one of these studio camera 6K Pros to my arsenal is something that actually does appeal to me a little bit. So there are times when I need to be able to use a specific lens. Like if I need to go out to 800 or 1000 millimeter to really zoom in on something, or if I need to go even wider on something, having an interchangeable lens camera can be very cool. My only hesitation with doing that is getting this camera to color match with my Sony. Sony's could be a little bit tricky. They do have some nice color controls, but I have not had good luck with getting a Blackmagic camera to match a Sony camera yet, no matter what. So I'll probably pick one up, or at least rent one to see if I can make it work first. And then if it does, then I'll probably purchase one. But yeah, having the ability to use EF lenses can be very cool. Something that would be a nice addition to everything that I've got. So, all right, let's go back to the chat and see what people were saying over there. Okay. NAB, you have to go with 8K Constellation for those who want 4K. So, I just want to mention that there seems to be some confusion out there. 8K Constellation is really a 4K switcher. So, when people talk about wanting a 4K version of the Constellation, a 4ME Constellation HD, we already have it. That's the Constellation 8K. We've had it for several years now. Like, I think we're coming up on 4 years since that product was announced. So what we're missing in the lineup is the 1ME and 2ME 4K versions of the Constellation switcher. So, yep. Okay. What's the streaming feature? So the streaming feature allows you to take whatever you're shooting on one of the cameras, send it over the internet into the new switcher. So, okay, let's see. I wonder if the console has controls for a media pool. It doesn't. If it's like their other ones, it doesn't have dedicated buttons or displays for it, but you can get to it through the menus on the LCD up top. So, yeah. Is the right side of the panel empty to keep Stream Deck companion? Yeah, it's an interesting use for it, that's for sure. All right. What EF lens would you recommend for sports with this camera? Probably one you can't afford. Let's actually take just a second and look at some of the lens options that actually work with this. So, I'll go full screen. So, take a look at Canon Servo lens. So Canon makes a series of lenses that actually do have electronic zoom. So they've got two that are affordable. This is $5,000 one, which is a 70 to 200 millimeter. So just over or just under 3:1 zoom ratio on that one. And then they've got these higher end ones, and then they've got this lower end one here. It's $4,600, which is 18 to 80 millimeters. So that'd be a good starter lens for a lot of situations. You could use it for sports, but you're not going to zoom in a whole lot with that. And if you want to get into the ability to have a wider zoom range, that's when you get into these higher end, more expensive lenses. So this Cine Servo 25 to 250 to T2.95, that lens is $31,000. It's interesting. Oh, there we go. Like I say, it's interesting. Only those came up because they know they offer more than that. So here's a 50 to 1,000. That could be a good sports lens, but you're looking at $70,000. Here's a decent general purpose one. $24,000. Here's another general purpose one, 15 to 120 millimeters, $31,000. So you're talking about a lot of money for lenses for this camera if you want to have it behave like a broadcast camera. But that said, you can put any EF lens that you want on this thing, and you can pick up some of those pretty cheap, especially now because Canon themselves are moving away from EF into RF. So people who are ditching their old EF cameras to go to the RF mount are selling their lenses, and they're selling them for pretty inexpensive. I should mention that using photography lenses for video cameras is not ideal. You don't get smooth zooms, so if you need to do a zoom move live, you're not going to get that with most cameras. You have to go to a servo lens like this. They're very often they're not parfocal. What that means is when you zoom in, when you either zoom in or zoom out, the lens will actually shift focus. So you zoom in, you're in focus. Then you zoom out, you're no longer in focus. There are parfocal lenses out there, but most of the time in photography, that's not really a necessary feature. So there are a lot of lenses where that doesn't, especially on less expensive lenses, they'll not design the lens to be parfocal to save some money and produce a cheaper lens. The other one is focus breathing. So as you focus in and out, you find that the lens appears to zoom in and out a little bit, and that's not a great thing for video or for cinema. So while EF style photography lenses can work for video, you're not going to want to be doing anything with zooming in and out live unless you get one of these servo lenses, and you probably don't want to be trying to do any sort of focus effects like rack focusing, because it's going to zoom on you while you're doing that. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. Different use cases. Photography lenses are designed for capturing one moment in time. They're not designed for capturing a period of time. So different use cases and different manufacturers will cut corners in different ways in order to get the lens to a certain price point. And those are some of the sacrifices that have to be made with that. So anyway, there are some lenses, there are some servo lenses out there, but they can get pretty pricey pretty quick. So let's see. Does the studio camera 4K Pro have ND filters? No, it does not. That ND filter thing is only on the 6K camera. Toad, and do I have COVID? No, I do not. I had it at the beginning of the year. I still have the cough. That's why I'm having to suck on cough drops. I thought the microphone converter was a month away. You are right, Neil. Thank you for the correction. The Z150 aren't constant aperture. They are above f4. So as long as you're choosing aperture it's f4 or slower, they are constant aperture. So let's see. EF lens is what a disappointment. Well, it's better than Micro Four Thirds. So B4 would certainly be a preferred alternative for those who work in video. But if you're buying new lenses, B4 tend to be just as expensive as the EF servo, and on the low end, EF lenses are considerably less money. So they're doing it to meet a price point. So it's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. Should have gone with a new Canon RF mount for the future. EF's probably going to fade out with DSLR cameras eventually. Probably true, but that's going to be a while. EF lenses have been around a long time. There's still a lot of manufacturers making them. Canon still sells them. They're just not developing new ones. So for the lifetime of this camera, EF is probably okay. RF would have been an interesting choice. Yeah, because RF can always be adapted to EF, but you can't go the other way. I was just thinking about lens options. Glad you're looking at that. So yes, so yeah. Canon lenses are slow, only T4.4. I have the 18-80 compact servo. T44 is going to be fine for most things. Let me describe very briefly what T means. So those of you who are coming from the photography world are probably used to f-stops. When you talk about cinema lenses, they work in t-stops. The difference is f-stop is a measure of the physical size of the opening of the aperture compared to the focal length of the lens. T-stop is a ratio of how much light is getting into the camera. So T tells you accurately how much light is making into the camera. F is a rough approximation and doesn't account for light loss going through the lens. So the numbers are somewhat comparable. The T4.4 is roughly equivalent to an f4 lens. So there you go. There are no EF lens options with the fast zoom like B4. Even the 30K versions are meant for cinema, not broadcast. They have slow zoom. Yeah, that is true. Photo lenses on video cameras is a no-no. Generally speaking, if you need to be changing your shots while your camera is live, photo lenses are not going to do a very good job of that. So, 33,000 on a lens must be a mistake. Nope, absolutely not. That's what they go for. So, Paul's saying sort from low to high to see what is available. So let me go back to that here. So hide that chat. So I'll sort from price low to high, but we're going to see that those are not servo lenses, those are the first ones. So the cheapest servo lens is a 4600, the next is 5000, and I have one at 6400, 6800, 7000, and they start to jump up from there. So you get some options from other manufacturers. Well, it's PL. It's not EF mount. But then you get into the expensive Canon ones pretty quickly. So yeah, the next one in the lineup there is 24,000. So pretty expensive, which is kind of the reality of that world. So what's the use for ND filters? So ND filter, ND stands for neutral density, which is basically a fancy way of saying it darkens the image. So it allows you to shoot outdoors or bright light situations without overexposing the camera, especially if you operate with a lens that has a large aperture, because the bigger the aperture on the lens, the more light gets in, right? So if you're shooting like f2 or f2.8 outdoors in the sun in the middle of the summer, you're going to need a neutral density filter in order to avoid overexposing the camera if you want to use a reasonable shutter speed. So, yeah. Randy saying Canon won't license the RF lenses. They're not currently licensing RF. That doesn't mean that they won't. So, yeah. Alrighty. Let's see. Hello, what's the best lens you would pick for the Blackmagic Design 6K Pro Studio? That depends entirely on your use case, what you're shooting. If you're shooting in a studio, that's going to be an entirely different lens than if you're outdoor shooting sports. So you really have to decide what lens is going to be the right one for you to choose based on the type of thing that you happen to be happen to be shooting. And unfortunately, that does mean if you're doing both, like I do, you're going to have to buy multiple lenses. And that's, again, one of the reasons that I have liked using a camcorder, because the camcorders that I use are designed to work in both situations pretty easily, pretty smoothly, without any major compromises. So I know I've noticed that there's a lot of resistance out there to people buying camcorders for doing live video work. They like to use DSLR style. They like to use cinema style cameras. They can absolutely work, but they have some significant limitations when compared to camcorders. So if someone is getting into this business for the first time and they're just investing in equipment for the first time and their workflow is primarily live streaming, a camcorder probably makes more sense than one of these studio cameras or a DSLR. So but again, it depends entirely on how you're going to be using it, what situations you're going to be shooting in, what you're going to be shooting, etc. So yeah, it's just going to vary quite a bit. Again, no PTZ camera. Who would buy one? Just different use cases. People have different situations that they happen to be working in. So, you can't say that this camera is not going to be interesting for anybody. There are people who are going to love this camera. So it just depends on the use case and the situations we're going to be using it. AF motor from Canon EF is very loud. Well, that's going to depend on the lens. Some of them are going to be very loud. Some of them are going to be silent. Canon actually does make quite a few lenses where the AF motor is completely silent. So it just depends on the particular model of lens that you're using. All right. Is it worth upgrade from the SDI Extreme ISO to the new Television HD 8 ISO? I guess that depends on what you need. If you need a higher quality control panel, then maybe it would be worth it. But if you're okay with the panel that the ATEM SDI Extreme actually has on it, then you may not find that have a lot of benefit to it. The cloud synchronization feature can be kind of interesting if that's something where you need to have somebody editing off-site right away. That could be an interesting thing that might be worth it to you. Having the additional MADI channels might be interesting if you want to do your audio mixing in the switcher instead of on a separate audio console. But yeah, it's really going to vary based on your use case. I don't think personally I would make that upgrade. I would for the sorts of events that I do, I would find that going to a Constellation switcher, the 2ME, would make more sense. It's less money. It has more inputs. It has 2 MEs. You give up the isolated recording. You give up the MADI capability compared to the new switcher that was just announced. Give up some of the streaming stuff compared to the ISO model that was just announced. But if you don't need those, then the Constellation can make a lot of sense. And if you did need MADI, you can always do the 4ME Constellation HD switcher, which does have MADI, and it's 3,000-ish range. So yeah, let's see. Sony FX6 or 9 versus Z280 and Z150. This is very much like the discussion a moment ago about going with the EF-based camera versus a camcorder. It depends entirely on what you're trying to achieve. Again, I'll mention the larger sensors that are in the FX6 and FX9 compared to the Z280 and 190 or 150 means that you're going to be able to get a shallower depth of field. You're going to be able to defocus the background behind a subject a lot more than you can on one of these camcorders. However, that comes with the flip side that focusing is going to be more tricky because you've got a smaller range that you have to, your depth of field is shallower. So you might have this much depth in your focus, whereas on one of the camcorders that might be like this. And so you've got a lot more wiggle room in terms of focus. So if you were dealing with a subject that's moving around a lot, say you're doing a business conference and someone's up there on stage, they're moving around a lot, you're probably going to find that shooting on a large sensor with a large aperture is going to cause you focus issues because you're having to constantly adjust based on how far away that person is from your camera. Or if your camera is on a moving platform like a jib or a slider or something like that, focusing with a larger sensor is going to be harder to do. It's a nicer look, you get that out of focus background behind your subject, but it's also harder to focus. And particularly on the Blackmagic cameras where the autofocus is basically unusable, it might be too much to keep up with. If you're shooting a situation where the camera and the subject don't move, they stay in the same place, then that's probably an acceptable way of using that camera. So just you have to evaluate how you're going to be using the camera to determine which one's going to be right for you. And the other issue is lens selection. You go with one of these studio cameras, you've got to put a lens on it. You got to find a lens that's going to work for your particular use case. If you need a wide zoom range, if you have a camera in the back of a room and you need to be able to get a wide shot, is be able to zoom in to your subject. Finding an interchangeable lens that actually allows you to do that, it's going to cost you a lot of money. So you just got to decide based on how you're going to be working, what's going to work for you. Okay. Why does BMD insist on using a single phone for remote camera contribution? Professionals would use live view or Teradek solutions. Probably just because they haven't been pressured into it. And the other issue is in order for those kinds of solutions to work, it has to go through a cloud service. And I'm guessing that they don't want to take that on just yet, like providing a cloud service in order to do that. So, Paul, we use PTZ fairly often. It's nice to have options, and the model Doug uses a very nice, slow, smooth zoom. So, yeah, some PTZs are good about that, others are not. So, outputs are less flexible on the new model. Only 2 are configurable, I believe. That is correct. The new television studio switcher. The 8 outputs that are paired with the inputs are program only. You can't select any other video source for those outputs. You can do some routing with the audio on those, but the video output is always going to be program. It has 2 aux outputs which are selectable. So, excuse me. If you need more than that, then maybe the ATEM SDI would be a better option. Those are more flexible, or one of the constellations. So. Remote contribution is a black box. Is it SRT based? We think probably not. We think it's probably RTMP because that's what they've used in the past. And they mentioned, Grant mentioned the streaming bridge, which is RTMP. So probably not SRT. Did someone happen to notice the latency when the 6K Pro Studio was on the mobile phone connection? It was under a second, but it wasn't. It wasn't just a few frames. It was noticeable. So yeah. I wish they used WebRTC or SRT, not RTMP. At least the port indicates 1935. Yeah, that's the port for RTMP. So yeah, it most likely, almost certainly uses RTMP instead of SRT or WebRTC. So yeah. Anyway, we got 5 new products today. The only one that's interesting for me personally is the 6K Pro camera, and that would be in addition to the cameras that I already use, not as a replacement for, certainly by any means. You get interchangeable lenses, but that does come with some degree of limitations in terms of what you can do because of lens availability. So being able to put your own lens on a camera is awesome. But it also means you have to find the lens that's going to work for your needs, which for the sort of workflows that I do means you're getting into very expensive glass. So, yeah. Alrighty, did I miss anything here? I think I got most of the comments. So, I wanted to keep this stream fairly short. I have I have another commitment I have to be involved with here in just a few minutes, so I won't be able to stick around for a long time. live drone usage, which brand of drone and RF link would you suggest for live sports? Is it F1 or horse racing? I have not been following that. I'm not a great person to ask that question. It's been a while since I researched drones. The last time I did research on a drone, I was using the DJI Phantom 3. So that's a number of years ago. That's still the drone that I have. So when I need drone coverage for an event, I hire somebody. I don't try and do that in-house. Not just because I don't maintain one, but also licensing and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to do it right. I'm going to do somebody that's properly licensed. I'm not going to take the risk, and I'm going to want somebody who's experienced. So, yeah, I leave that up to the drone operator to do that research and figure out what's going to be the best option for those kinds of things. Alrighty. Did I miss any other comments? I think that's going to be most of it. So, thanks for providing valuable information on the subject. Yeah, I'm glad to share what I know. I mean, I don't know everything, that's for sure, but I'm happy to share what I know. I can already imagine the comments when cams don't sync up through multiple RTMP stream. There's not time code, sadly, unless someone provides it otherwise. Yeah. Doug, that is my concern. Try to use ENG camera combined with ATEM switchers. No. Sure. For the 6K Pro BMPC or in the new ones, Camera Studio. So these are not ENG cameras. That's very clear. If you need an ENG camera, you need an ENG camera. So ENG, for those who are not familiar, is electronic news gathering. It's like the shoulder mount, where like someone walks around with a camera on their shoulder for news type stuff. And those use the B4 lens mount. So Blackmagic does have a B4 camera. It's the Ursa Broadcast, but they don't have a studio camera that has B4 on it. In the past, they did sort of recommend that you could do B4 on their older studio camera. Yeah, older studio cameras with an adapter never worked well. It wasn't a good idea. Those cameras were not very good anyway. So. Paul saying I've been using the DJI Mini 3 Pro, and it's amazing that the Mavic 2 Pro previous to that, I have loved it and have over 200 hours flying. So, yeah, Paul knows more about drones than I do, that's for sure. He follows that much more than I do. So the Ursa is still in the game as a decent camcorder, right? The Ursa Broadcast and the Ursa Mini Pro are okay, but they are showing their age. They really should be updated at this point. The image quality on those is not as good as some of the newer cameras, like the Pocket Cinema cameras, and even the new studio cameras from Blackmagic. So those really do badly need an update. The Ursa Broadcast is not too bad, but it's not quite up to the image quality of some of the newer cameras from Blackmagic. So I've considered buying one just to have one as part of my arsenal, but then you got to put a lens on it. So, yeah, you're not just buying a camera. You're buying a whole ecosystem. Like on top of the camera, you've got to get batteries. You got to get shoulder mount. You got to get a viewfinder. You got to get a lens. When you get a lens, if you got to make sure you get the servo zoom that's appropriate for it. If it doesn't come on it, yeah, it's a whole thing. And those cameras tend to be a lot heavier than camcorders, so you might be needing to upgrade your tripods if you happen to be shooting on tripods. So it's a whole investment. It's not just shelling out $3,000 for a camera and being done. That's just the start of it. So, alrighty. Looks like we don't really have much by the way of other questions coming in, but. So anyway, there it is. So we have the new ATEM television studio. Actually show these television studio. There we go. So yeah, so the new ATEM television studio switcher, HD8 and HD8, excuse me, ISO. They were announced today. 2 new 8-channel switchers, SDI based, built-in control panel. A lot of audio capabilities that we've not seen at this level before. Yeah, and then they have cloud synchronization capabilities. So when you record in the switcher, you can have that automatically sync up to Dropbox or Google Drive, and then somebody else can sync that down to one of their cloud store products or to a computer for editing, whatever. And then in addition to that, they also announced new studio cameras, an EF mount in the 6K Pro, and then an update to the 4K Pro, which uses the Micro Four Thirds, which offer over the internet streaming capability to get the video from those cameras directly into the new switchers over the internet. So it allows you to do some remote production that you would have had some difficulty doing with Blackmagic products previously. So that's kind of the gist of what happened today. And they also did announce a new microphone converter to convert analog audio into MADI, which the new switcher uses. So that is about it for now. So I'm check the chat just one more time before we go. Is the new camera via RG45 a way to go instead of to SDI like NDI? Yes, that is really what they're trying to do there. We don't know what the latency is like when going over a local network, so I have to do some testing in order to figure out whether the latency is low enough to really use that, whether that's really practical or whether SDI is still really the way to go. So overall, are you happy with these updates or expected more? I honestly expected more. I thought for sure we were going to be getting new 4K versions of the Constellation 1ME and 2ME switchers. You know, when I talked to a Blackmagic rep at NAB last year, they told me that those switchers were coming, and we're nearly a year out from that rep saying that. So disappointing that we haven't seen that. I think the television studio is going to be interesting for a handful of people. Those who really want that hands-on control panel, or that's something that's really important, that's going to be a decent option because this switcher is actually less money than Blackmagic's cheapest dedicated control panel. The new camera updates, I think the 6K Pro is interesting. I'm glad they're moving away from Micro Four Thirds. Micro Four Thirds is not a great solution for live video, especially if you need high quality image and you need the ability to be able to zoom in as part of a shot. The lenses just don't exist in the Micro Four Thirds world. They are expensive in the EF world, but they do exist, and you can rent them if you need them or whatever. So anyway, so yeah, I would say overall kind of a disappointing announcement, and you can tell that they didn't have a lot to say because the pace on the video was actually very slow. It's probably the slowest video I've seen from them ever, focusing a lot more on mundane features and even focusing somewhat on introductory concepts in terms of live video production, more than I've seen them ever do before. So pretty clear from the beginning of the video that they were not doing anything too exciting today. So alrighty, okay, well, it looks like the questions have kind of stopped, and I do need to break for another meeting I have here in a few minutes. So, but thanks everybody for joining in, for watching. When these products actually go live, I'm going to try and put some links in the video description down below, so you can help the channel out by purchasing any of those products through those links. That's very much appreciated. Can't do that yet because none of the retailers have shown those on their websites just yet. So anyway, that's going to do it for now. So if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I do videos about video production, and I always try to do videos about once a week. Just hasn't worked out that way. I will get back there once I have my studio in my basement completed. So anyway, but that's going to do it. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, you can leave those in the comment section down below, or you can join us over on Discord. You can find my Discord channel. You go to djp.li/discord in your browser, and that will redirect you directly to my Discord server, and you can sign up and ask questions of the community there. So, but that's it. Thanks everybody for watching, and have a fantastic day.